What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist Astrology. Justin here, and are you ready to get into them lunar shenanigans? Cause it's the eclipse. We gotta be ready. this has shown this lunar cycle of just how much change that the eclipse times really brings, and how fast things can happen when we go with this, and how consistent that they are in showing these and recognizing the patterns of astrology when you're getting into these things, and be able to make different moves depending on the signs that are coming. Yeah, the week starts off with the bang, but as we start to get towards the middle of the week and starts to end in the week, there's this really kind of trine city that's happening. The moon's going to make a series of trines, which brings a bit of ease that I think we'll all need as we start to wind down out of this eclipse cycle. But Mars has one last word to say, which brings a bit of a question mark that we're definitely got my eyebrow raised a little bit, but we'll get there when we get there. Now, if you're new here, again, my name is Justin, and one of the things that I do in this channel is talk about the lunar shenanigans, which is the astrology of the moon, and what sign it's in, what phase it's in, when it happens to go void of course, and to get a feel of the energies as the moon is making these different aspects with the different celestial bodies. The moon's closely associated with the people, the city, the home front is really associated closely again with the body. And so there's this real kind of personal relationship, and watching the moon can be a very fruitful. The moon was the idea of foresight. So we love that good old moon. And we're gonna get into some cool, not even just astrological things, but some astronomical things as well when we're talking about all this here. Now, if you want to support the work that I do further, down in the description box, there's a link for my Patreon page, and I have two tiers there. One of them will give you access to the Lucky Day podcast, which is a monthly show that talks about the most auspicious dates for whatever endeavor that you're wanting to initiate. And the second one will give you access to that, plus a personalized monthly transit report from me. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely go check that out. Now, let's go ahead and get into this thing here, because I'm going to be covering the week of March 3rd through the 9th, 2026. And let's go ahead and get into this. Because like I said, we start off with the eclipse. We're not playing around. And the eclipse is going to happen at about 3:37 a.m. Pacific time. Now, one thing to think about this, just kind of building up beforehand. If you're watching the video version of this, I have the chart of the eclipse up there. It's happening at 12 degrees and 53 minutes of the moon in Virgo and the sun in Pisces, very close with the north node and the south node here. And one thing when you're thinking about the eclipse, where the solar eclipse was thought to be this new beginnings that are happening. There's these changes that are happening for both of them, both of the eclipse energies, but with the lunar ones, these were thought to be major endings that were happening when we get to this. And this has been building up since the waning phase of the previous lunar cycle, building up to that solar, and then now we're reaching the peak of it. And now we're going to get ready to get to the other side of this. But you want to look to see where you have Virgo and Pisces in your chart, because this is where individually you would be noticing these changes, these themes that are evolving in the Virgo and Pisces section of your chart. And this could be a very draining moon, just because when you look at the moon here being next to the south node was thought of this sort of decreasing nature, where the north node was thought of this sort of increasing nature. And there's a lot going on in Pisces, a whole lot. And so this can be a lot for the moon. This could be this feeling of maybe sluggishness, of feeling drained, of feeling like just really being a very palpable lunar eclipse. So anytime there's a full moon, you know that there's always, even if people don't follow astrology, there is this feeling of like, oh, that makes sense that people are on one. And so that would just be something that just keep your wits about you when we're talking about this. But Yeah, this is one too. If you, especially if you have any points around the mutable signs, that's Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces, or Gemini. This one may be working with you more closely because it's working from either square, opposition, depending on where, or conjunctions, depending on where this lands for you. But yeah, this is a particularly sort of tough one too that we were coming up on, because right before the moon made this opposition with the sun and had this eclipse happen, the moon had this opposition with Mars, which is the hardest aspect that you could have with a malefic planet. And something that I've been reading the Mathesis here lately, that's Firmicus Maternus's book. And there's this really heavy emphasis on when the moon is waxing and applying to Mars, and this harsh, it's more harsh than if the moon was waning, whereas it's vice versa with Saturn, where if the moon was waning, then the like the moon is going to be doing here on this as we get after this eclipse, that it's going to be, that it's a bit harsher than if the moon was waxing and approaching to Saturn, whether it be by square or by opposition. And so there's, it's good to notice these nuances, because I remember when a few lunar cycles, when there was a another Mars moon opposition, that there was another big sort of disaster that was happening, some sort of violence that happened with with the martial energy that was being there. And so these are something to tune into, to notice these repetitions that are happening. And even on a personal note, this, it could be even just something as simple as just being mindful as I cut my finger while I was cutting some vegetables not too long ago, and so things like that. And I found myself being, Mars was getting ready to come up on a square actually with my moon placement as we speak. And I've been noticing where I've been a lot more clumsier than normal, just like tripping on random things. And it's just like, okay, let's get better situational spatial awareness. But those could be some themes that come up with the moon. Just there could be this, or even Mars, and the malefics were thought of with disease and sickness. So this could be making sure to take care of the body, being able to get as much rest as one can, to be able to nourish the body as one can, to do all those lunar things, to do even just taking a moment, just breathing, thinking about with the moon. The breath is a very regulating force to keep the mind clear in states of oppositions, which you have a lot going on here. When we kind of move back to the third here, the moon's not just opposing the sun, and opposing the sun in a way that the moon's been stained. When you look at it in an eclipse, the moon is not that normal white, that normal, that's like that sort of bright brilliance that the moon has. There's this ominous red, that almost sort of martial quality that comes into that when you think about something with the moon. Something's off with the moon, and that moon opposite the sun and Mercury, there could be not understanding of what's happening here. You see things clearly, but it still doesn't make any sense. It's hard to comprehend. Oh, we've reached this sort of climax with this lunar eclipse. What could that possibly? What goodness that moon sextile Jupiter could possibly come out of this? And that's something that, oh, I forgot the T in that. That's fine. This would be the moon sextile Jupiter. But how does one keep that sense of faith, keep that hope for life, for love, for desire, for the abundance that Jupiter offers, for the justice that Jupiter offers? And this is one where, if I could offer a little bit of something, Jupiter's going to be stationing direct soon. And so that is some positive omens that are coming with this. Jupiter's going to be able to get back to doing more of what Jupiter does best, of relieving those bonds, and the relief from all bad things, and the promise of goodness, that restoration of faith. What Jupiter does when it's not in its home sign, it's in its state of exaltation, it's raised to the top, but it depends on too the condition of the moon. And so there is this right now delay in Jupiter's function with it being retrograde, and especially right now it's basically just stood still. Jupiter's not moving for anything. But the nice thing about this eclipse that even though it's happening and Mars is witnessing this eclipse because it moved in there, it's about 42 minutes into to Pisces when this eclipse happened. Even though Mars is there by a wide kind of conjunction from the sun and opposition from the moon, it's one both they're separating from that, and they're both the sun and the moon are applying to this Jupiter retrograde. They're running to Jupiter. They're it's well the moon more so than the sun, but the sun's getting there, and it's one of those things where I think with the just to bring the sun in this for a little bit, the sun trining Jupiter that's building up here. This is that that keeping that sense of faith. There's that sense of togetherness. There's that sense of that sense of having one's, whether it be family, one's community, one's friends, one's spouse, whatever that your child, whatever that happens to look like, that relationship that we're going to. The times may be confusing. The moon representing the people, the sun representing that authority figure, that sense of we're not sure where that direction is driving, but we are going to figure this out together, and we can figure out what abundance lasts for us elsewhere. And there's a strong intuitive function with Jupiter when we're thinking about that, having that sense of faith. So there's a lot to talk about with this eclipse. It's a very mixed bag there. Venus is in the mix in its exaltation. The benefics are exalted. So there's something there's still something that's trying to come strongly out of this, I think there. But it's a mixed bag for sure coming into this, and the eclipses do bring this rocky, erratic energy, and there's always been these symbols and indications of that. So this is something where, whether it's on a however wide the scope of reflection goes for you in these aspects, I think a good way to think about it is to see how when the moon is opposing your sun, or when the moon is sextile your Jupiter placement or opposed your Mercury placement, what that feels like for you personally, and then compare that with how that could potentially translate on a broader scale, whether it be because the moon represents the body, but it could represent the home, the city. You do these that sense of fortune with the moon, how fast the moon moves compared to the other celestial bodies. That's why it's good to watch it, because the moon gives these regular intervals of when these larger, more slower planets make these aspects together. The moon gives a sort of foresight, a sort of prelude to that bigger trans thing. So this is good to follow the moon and watch how the moon waxes and wanes and builds. But something to kind of move before I move out of that, I wanted to mention that down in the description box, there's this really cool link that I got from this course that I took from this guy Alexander Kolesnikov. It was some neat resources that I got from that one, and one of them was his site timeanddate.com, and it covers the eclipse information as far as like where the eclipse is visible from. And according to the site here, is visible from Asia, Australia, and North America, especially on the western side. So that's actually not too bad. I'm getting up to see this eclipse for sure. I'm gonna get my telescope set up to get when I'm recording this. The eclipse is early tomorrow morning, and the really neat, I don't know if we call it neat, but the very almost fascinating thing is that this is going to be the last total lunar eclipse until December 31st, 2028. I need to verify that with my, just need to verify that. But that's going to be the last one for a while where there's a total lunar eclipse. And I think there's a statement in that as well. Again, another sort of prelude for the next one to really take in what could possibly change in the next couple of years, especially when you think about that as going into the new calendar year. There's something I think to take of note there. A lot of significators that may happen to do with around the most maximum vision visibility of the eclipse is pretty much like the eastern part of Australia, and like I said, the western part of North America, and then like the western part of Canada. And yeah, Alaska, you see that as clear as day, and the whole Pacific there is highlighted. So maybe there's something that shows up with the ocean that what we don't get into that, but you'll be able to. It's a pretty broad scope of how visible the eclipse starts, and some times that I wanted to again. The neat thing about this site is that it'll adjust to your local time, but here in Pacific time, the penumbral eclipse begins at about 12:45 Pacific time, and now they're talking about into the third. The partial eclipse is visible at about 1:50. The full eclipse begins about 3:04, and I'm going to get about 3 to see that. And then the maximum eclipse is about 3:33 a.m. Pacific time. The full eclipse ends at about 4:02. The partial eclipse ends at about 5:17. I'm asleep by then. And then the penumbral eclipse ends at about 6:23 a.m. So that's just to give you a scope. The total eclipse duration lasts about 5 hours and 39 minutes, and the totality is at about 58 minutes of time. So that's a really kind of, I thought, really fascinating things to just think about just when you're observing the eclipse. It's according to the countdown here, it's in 10 hours, 49 minutes, and 57 seconds. In case you were curious, we're really getting live coverage of this. At least the website is, so definitely check that out if you're interested. But yeah, okay, I could go on and on about this eclipse, obviously, but we won't get to talk about it again until another one until August. So we thought and again, this is the last total eclipse since 2020 or until 2028. Figured this one deserved its time, and time of reflection to think about this. Now, when we get to the 4th of March, before the moon enters into Libra, the moon's going to form in opposition with Venus. And when you have oppositions with the benefics, sure, it's the benefics, and that's fine. It's Venus is exalted, so that's great. But it's still in opposition. It's considered the hardest aspect is when the celestial bodies are in opposite zodiac signs, so 180 degrees from one another. And there could be this tension where maybe the eclipse brought some shifts in your relationships where maybe something, and this may not even be relationships with people, maybe it's relationships with a possession, maybe with what used to be a gift is now turned into something else. And we'll talk about that more harder aspect of it with the next aspect that's building up. But there's some sort of relationship change, something that's in need of nurturing. When you think about the moon and Venus both having that sort of feminine motherly quality that both of them bring to the table when we think about significators. And this even gives to me, there's a strong component with Venus as far as like priesthood, again, that idea of faith like Jupiter has, where Jupiter more so deals sort of like with the Gnostic knowledge. There's that devotion that Venus brings to the craft, to the gift that is life, and now that is at odds with the body. I was listening to a podcast talking about these nurses that'll go out on that'll go on like the battlefields and tending to the civilians, and that's sort of what that gives me, that moon opposite Venus, this trying to find this beauty, form this camaraderie to bring this sense of even again love and life that Venus can bring and that the moon can bring, and try to how to bring that to a tough, to be at odds with something when the body's feeling off. And so that's an interesting note to sort of end on there, even as Venus ends its time in its state of exaltation, when it was really in that state of brilliance. And Venus is going to get to this point where it's almost there, where it's going to be visible in the evening sky. You'll be able to see Venus as an evening star and be able to see it setting here soon, because Venus is moving really fast. You can still see Saturn for a little bit too, but that's even something to think about. We're going to be seeing Venus in a different light for a little bit, and I mean, Venus is still going to be beautiful when you look at it in the sky, but it's what's going on with the body, with the moon, that depends on where you can find that beauty, independent of what's going on in your environment and in your life. But then we get to, I know it's a lot to think about in the at least here in the morning time, but then we get to where the moon moves into Libra, and that's going to happen at about 10:55 a.m. Pacific time. And when we look at the lay of the land, this is a tough one, because the moon's first aspect that it's going to have is that opposition with Saturn. And just like how I was saying, the hard aspect with a waxing moon to Mars tends to be a bit harder than the waning. It's opposite for Saturn, where the waning moon when it's diminishing the light, seems to be harder with Saturn than if the moon is waxing in light. And this will be something to watch as we start to get on the other end of the eclipse, and thinking about the long-term effects and restrictions and violence that have happened, because Mars is not the only one that represents that violence. It's Saturn as well. This but Saturn more so is associated with the waterways, and that idea of, yeah, that bringing together of the land and the sea, and how vital that can be, and how destructive that force of the sea can be to the land, and not just the fire. And but more than anything, I think this really does bring about the idea of time with Saturn, and how that can bring about anxieties for the future, and how to move, and where to go, and where the boundaries are, where the constraints and restrictions are. That now that this we've really sort of kicked off this new Saturn in Aries, has been kind of wild with the stories, with the story starting off with a couple of eclipses. And so there's a lot of change that's going to be happening here, I think, over the next couple of years, and even going when you even get to thinking about the next sign that Saturn moves into, and that's way down the line. And I think that sometimes too, that getting so far in the future can raise anxieties higher, because we're not entirely sure how the times are going to look. Just as Saturn changes, everything around is going to change. Jupiter's going to change, Mars is going to change, the sun will change, the moon will definitely change 100 times in that matter of time. But I do think that there is this almost surrender that comes, I think, when the moon is opposing Saturn, where there's this, how do we find the motivation? How do we not get to this place of depression and this state of where Saturn is trying to take away the light of the moon, and it gets tricky. And I think that it's something where with the being opposite Venus too, I think it is remembering that we're all experiencing this, and to try to remember that sense of community as that makes sense. It's a little tricky box there. But it's not just that the moon, even though the moon starts off with that, it's a kind of a quieter time for the moon while it's in Libra, and it's in the sign of Venus, which is still exalted for this little bit. It's going to also form a square with Jupiter, which we can talk about next, because that's going to be on the 5th of March here. And with the moon's forming a square with Jupiter, again, this is another hard aspect. I got the chart up here if you're watching the video version. Happens at about 15 degrees and 7 minutes of Cancer in Libra. And the squares, when they're 90 degrees apart from one another, so in that like modality of the cardinal signs. And I like that Jupiter at least is in this superior position to the moon, but there's this challenge maybe in seeing, even after just going through all of that heaviness, eclipse energy, Saturn energy, going through all of that. It's like still trying to find that enthusiasm, that hope, that find that help that one could need when we're dealing with whatever problems maybe that we're having. This could be where maybe there's going on something with the finances, or maybe something going on with the home, or something with the kids, or something with your work, your health, your relationships, your career, your faith, your friends, whatever that may be happening for you. It is, I think, even though again the hard aspects with the benefics can even sometimes be this: we don't appreciate something until it's gone. I think that there can bring this, if not actual physical gift, that Jupiter's bringing this idea of perspective that can come to be able to see things in a different light, to see where, oh, maybe I did take this certain thing for granted, or maybe I could have been more responsible here, and adjusting, not wishing that, oh, how could I this thing change, is that okay, this is where things are at, this is where I'm going to have to move, and how I'm going to have to try to sow new crops and to try to build new life here, try to get something to take root in the ever changing times of this experience that we have. So it's a mixed bag, I think, again with this one, because it still has that touch of Saturnian energy in this, even though it's separating from the moon. But again, I do think that there is still these good things that are happening too in the world. You know, this it's never just malefics at work. There's this benefic energy too that's happening here. So just something to think about with the moon squared Jupiter. But then we get into the 6th of March, and not much is happening here other than that the moon is going to enter into Scorpio at about 8:01 p.m. Pacific time. And this is a trickier section of the chart for the moon, because this is where the moon finds itself in its fall. When a celestial body is in its fall, it just has a harder time of doing the things that it does best. When you think about the moon in Taurus, where it's exalted, where there's this solidified energy, stable, steady sort of energy with Taurus, it gets a little bit different with Scorpio, where I think there's a focus with Scorpio. It can maybe get to where it's goes overboard in a sense, to where it starts to harm maybe not necessarily harm the body, but to where it starts to, where one can get maybe stuck in the emotions and kind of forget about the outside appearance, get stuck more in the subjective world, if that makes sense, with the moon in Scorpio, just thinking about it more so in a broad sense. But this is where too the moon is moving into the Scorpio portions of your chart. So if you happen to have a lot of Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, or Leo, then the moon may be activating more for you. And just like with when the moon's in Libra, that's going to activate the cardinal signs. I should have mentioned that earlier. That's going to be Libra, Capricorn, Aries, and Cancer. While the moon's in Libra, that's going to be more active time for you. So something to just kind of pay attention to there. But yeah, see what the moon, or what the Scorpio portion of your house, whether house or houses, depending on what house system you use. But when you look at the lay of the land for the moon, even though this is a trickier place for the moon, it does have reception with Mars, who ultimately is not doing too bad. It doesn't have any particular dignity in Pisces. It has some bounds in towards the latter end of Pisces that it rules. It has its reception with its ruler, Jupiter, who's again about to go direct here in a few days. The only minus that there's going to be that Mars-Mercury conjunction that's sort of building up, and at the same time, Venus is now moved into Aries and getting ready to conjoin Saturn. So there's a lot of activity that's brewing, but it feels like the moon is still trying to find some ease in this, that it's not trying to be another eclipse moment. It's like coming off of the eclipse, kind of shaking that feeling off as we get into that. But let's get into the 7th, because the moon is going to trine Mars, and the trine is when the celestial bodies are 120 degrees apart. And so they're in like this like elements here of water energy between Scorpio and Pisces. And when you think about the trine with Mars, this is a more easier aspect if we're going to be witnessing the malefic planets. Whether it be, we would rather it be a trine or a sextile than a square or an opposition or even a conjunction. And this could just help it to take that more inflammatory energy of Mars and turn it into something more constructive, to take that feeling and maybe exasperation or frustration and turn it into a focus, to channel it into something more motivating, where you can get something accomplished, get to have something to alchemize the situation, to alchemize the feeling, whatever that happens to fall for you in that kind of maybe Scorpio section, and maybe the Pisces sections of your chart, because there's been a lot of activity that's been happening there. So now this is an opportunity to move different, to try to, it may feel like a force, but it's like it's moving with this sort of intuitive guidance, where it's just like, you know what, I just kind of gotta just trust this feeling. I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna do this thing, make this move, and we'll see. We'll just kind of just feel this out as we go, kind of feeling on. Maybe I think it's still a malefic, so I think there's still that tension there that can come, but it just feels more manageable, more surmountable when it comes with the trine with Mars. So that's something to think about there too. But I still think that just pay attention to any sort of aggression, feeling like on edge, or feeling any sort of anxieties or things like that. I feel like and how maybe one might project that to try to, if we're not processing that in oneself, that will turn it into, it'll show up in someone else, and then they'll become the enemy. So, and then we're not really solving the problem. So that's just something to think about there. Interestingly enough, that's happening right around the Sun Mercury cazimi. If you're looking at the chart here, that is happening at 16 degrees, about a degree away from trining with Jupiter there. So there something feels like a lot of clarity that's happening here. So at least just again intuitively knowing how to move, and how I think that's going to even change the relationships maybe in the long term, with Venus coming up on Saturn. And I don't necessarily mean in a negative way, but just in a maybe more long term way. So that's just something to just kind of think about there. But then we get to the 8th of March, and like I said, it's like trine city here. We got the moon's going to trine Jupiter, going to trine Mercury, and then trine the sun. So there's a lot of ease between the one of the benefics. And the moon's not gun is going to talk with Venus here soon, but it's trying one of the benefics. It's trying Mercury, who are both of them are retrograde, and it's trying the sun here, and it can get this feeling of understanding how to move and feeling good about the motion, to see some sort of maybe end in sight, to see that light come on at the end of the tunnel after one has been maybe strolling around in the darkness for a while, to come up out of the abyss and to come up and get some fresh air again, or at least to be able to see where one can, or it's just like someone grabbing one's hand. I'm just picture just kind of just pulling one up. It just gives that sort of camaraderie vibes with just the sun, with the Jupiter, because the sun is more than just that authority figure. The sun was a significant, it was a sign of friendship. And so to have both of those two, there's a chance for kind words to, I think, to be expelled here, to have this sense of empathy, this sense of compassion, all this water. Just get in this water and let that be something that moves one, to meet with that idea of love. I know it's going to sound a bit kind of mushy, but It's this is a nice bit of energy. This is a nice pocket here, and the nice thing about this, I think, too, around this time where Mercury is trining with Jupiter, the moon would have is going to be really coming in close within a degree of that, and so there's just this it feels to me like a lot of this clarity that, hey, things are going to be moving soon. If we could just get through this week, we just manage through this week, then we could hopefully start seeing the some sort of reversal of all of this of the activity that's been happening over this period of time during this eclipse period. But then we get to the ninth, the last day of the week, and before the or no, actually, yeah, the moon's gonna finish up doing all that, and then it's gonna enter into Sagittarius at about 8:36 a.m. Pacific time. And oh, you know what? I should let me backtrack actually a little bit. So actually, on the 8th, if you're, I'm glad I caught that. And, on the 8th here, it's going to be daylight savings time, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure it's on the 8th. So especially if you're doing like any sort of electional astrology, pay attention to that. Make sure that if you're using any sort of like astrology software system that is just adjusting to daylight time as opposed to standard time, if that is something that's recognized where you're at. So ignore that. So this is really going to be, oh yeah, it's about 8:36 a.m. It's supposed to be Pacific Daylight Time for this period there. We're in the middle of Mercury retrograde, so there's just going to be some typos in it. It's fine. It is fine. I'm trying a new microphones, all sorts of new things that are happening here. Things are failing, things are growing. So but the moon's entered into Sag, and I got the chart up here. If you're looking at this, and if we're watching the what the moon's going to be doing, it's got a series of squares that it's going to be forming. First, it's going to do some trines with Saturn and with Venus, which will be overall positive. But it's going to end on this harder note with Mars as we end the week, which is kind of a bummer. And then we'll get to next week as we get to the last quarter. Things will really start to wrap up with the eclipse cycle. Usually, like I've heard where this could be where the period, since the eclipse cycle usually starts about a week before the solar eclipse, it would end about a week after the lunar eclipse. But I'd like to just give it to where we get to the next new moon, where we just start this whole new lunar cycle and start on a fresh note. Give that period, then this eclipse time, the time that it deserves. And I think that when we get into Sag, we start off with the moon trining Saturn, and I think that could be feeling not necessarily energized by what's to come, but feeling a bit more energy and to be able to handle the weight of what's to come. That there's work that's going to need to be done, but it's something that one can put in that devotion for with Venus being trine there, but to make it to maybe even infuse that idea of discipline and devotion and the commonalities that come with the two, that with it done in regularity, how it can create this beauty and create this change and this betterment as one is just going through this experience. But of course, then we get to Mars, that moon square Mars, and this is where the moon is waning. So I wanted to point that out and just really kind of pay attention and see what sort of happens as we move through these, as we see what happens in our personal lives, see what happens in more sort of mundane worldly events. But it gives that idea of that even though we're trying to stay in this discipline, we're trying to keep in this devotion, to keep in this faith, to find the joy, the laughter, the love, and all of this, that life is still going to do its thing with Mars showing there. And it's something that the moon reminds us regularly. It reminds us once a month we have a couple of squares with Mars, and then an opposition and a conjunction. Same with Saturn, same with Venus, same with Jupiter, and then the cycle goes on. And it's just like we relate to them differently depending on where everyone else is situated. So it's never quite the same thing, but there are commonalities that we can find in this as we observe the patterns in the astrology. And let me go ahead and shift over. But that's the really sort of useful thing that you can do, just even less on a more worldwide scale, but again on a personal scale, to be able to mark these times where it's like, oh, the moon's in Sag, this is really good for my fire placements. This is where there's going to be ease, where there's going to be flow, or oh, I have a lot of mutable placements. This is going to be a more active period for me. I just want to, that way I can embrace for that, and then notice the nuances in them, because there may be periods where one would be a little more tense, but maybe you have some easier aspects from other planets that's making this pocket really good, and then normally pockets that are good, the reverse is happening, and then to even understand that flow. And it may sound more convoluted or more strenuous and monotonous maybe than it seems, but it gets you interacting in your life differently. And then when you see these terms, it's just like, oh, okay. And now it's not a matter of why is this happening. Is that, oh, so this is how that's showing up for me. This is how I'm going to need to start moving. And usually you could start seeing these things just earlier and earlier as you start to move them. But then usually there's a certain point it even feels like you can even take that in forms of the context, because again things can change at a drop of a dime, and I think that the moon reminds us of that, where we can tell when things are going to be, and that's why I like to use the terms like to say more active as opposed to more ease, is that when we have those harder aspects, is things are maybe forcing us into different modes of actions, whereas when we have like the trines, the sextiles, is something where we can feel more in control, feel more like we're in the flow of life and flow of this experience. So can be really, this or at least this is how I invite to understand the astrology and to relate it into a different astrology, as opposed to, oh, I'm a sun in Cancer. It's to have where, oh, well, my Leo is rising and I have all these planets going through my, let's say in the example with this one, this is Aries rising in this chart I have on the moon in Sagittarius. And let me actually switch back over real quick just to kind of demonstrate that. But there would be a lot of activity going on in the 12th house, which could be dealing with more sort of like isolation, especially if you happen to, let's say, have a day chart, like there's a day chart in this one here. Maybe they're maybe going through a solar return. But there's a lot going on in that 12th house. Maybe there's an idea of thinking about maybe foreign travel. Maybe there's something that's going on with the health, dealing with the 12th house. Here, it's just going to all depend. We got a lot going through in your first house with Saturn and Venus going there, Jupiter going through your home space. Again, look at that, already something going on with the potentially with the home space there. So you can start to see those connections early on, start to make those pieces, and it just starts to lock in a bit easier. And again, you start to feel in that flow, as opposed to feeling like things are more or less like happening to oneself. So it's interesting, I think, in the way into relate into that sort of as above so below sort of concept. So I think that's all I got for you there. This is a bit of a longer one there, but I really felt like when we're talking about the eclipses that it deserves, and as we're getting out of again these eclipse cycles, how to really kind of navigate them again, so that they don't just feel like these just tumultuous periods of time, which again they can bring about these erratic sort of changes there, but we can understand where these changes may be coming up and how to better set up for rainy days, depending on if if it's happening in your financial access, like it was happening for me. I have Leo rising, or if this is happening in like your home and like you say your career space, or maybe something with your between child and friendships and groups, or something with health, or something with the you and another, maybe with like a spouse or a business partner or something. So just again, this can give you just good ideas of where this is coming by, for even just looking at the houses. So but yes, that's all I got for you because again, I could keep here all day. But if you want to, I have down in the description box. I got a whole bunch of got a whole bunch of things for you. One of them is a couple of playlists for the Celestial News Monthly and for the Lunar Shenanigans. And the Celestial News Monthly will just give you a broader sense of how to take in what's happened this month, as far as it just gives you a breakdown from the perspective of the sun and the other classical planets. So that's something to pay attention to there. Then I also have, like I said, I have a link for that eclipse site if you want to check that out, if you want to see for future eclipses that are going to be happening, where they're going to be visible from. It's really neat. I think it's really neat, and it takes it off of just the charts here, gives it to you in the sky, and gets one looking up more and bringing that sense of wonder back into the experience, I think. But yeah, that's down there for you. There's also these playlists that I have about different celestial bodies and zodiac signs in different places, whether it be like the place of money, place of home, place of marriage, place of other people's resources, things along those lines. They're all deviated or messed up, or not messed up. They're all sorted by, and neatly neatly so, they're all sorted by the different placements. So if you go down, check out those different, like Saturn in Pisces or Saturn in Capricorn. That's all available for you as well there. But I think that's all I have to tell you. So yeah. And like I said, if you happen to be where you can get a good vision, the sky's looking clear enough for me, because I'm recording this the day before the eclipse. So the sky's looking pretty clear for me. I'm gonna set my alarm for 3, and we're gonna see if I can catch that eclipse. I'm gonna get my telescope all set up, and yeah, watch that moonrise. We'll see, depending on what time it is. I may have to go up a little bit higher, but we'll see about that. But yeah, let me know if you happen to get a picture of the moon and what that looks like for you, and I will catch you on the next one later.